Thank you for joining us today. We would love to know where you're joining from. If you'd like to put your name and location in the chat, we sure love to see that. If you are a Harding colleague or a Harding graduate student who is seeking micro-credential credit or professional development credit, please go ahead and put your program in the chat as well. It helps me keep track. Just one more minute and we'll get started. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I am Dr. Andrea Bishop. I direct the Center for Leadership and Development at Harding University. And with me today is an incredible human being that I'm so excited I get to share with you. Colonel retired Nathan Todd is with us today. Colonel Todd is an Arkansas boy from down the road in Pine Bluff who has traveled the world in his 37 years of service in the Army and Army Reserve. And now he serves in multiple capacities, including Secretary of the Arkansas Department of Veteran Affairs. He's a member of the University of Arkansas Board of Trustees. He's also a member of the Advisory Council for my program here at Harding. Nate, thank you so much for your faithful life of service, and thank you for saying yes to our time together today.
Bishop, so excited. I've been on the campus of Harding University. What a great academic and faith-based institution. I want to thank Dr. Lee, the Dean of the School of Education. He and I have had a friendship for many years. I know you have a new president, the faculty and staff, for the opportunity to participate in this dialogue on leadership and in some ways self-actualization of our gifts. Looking forward to it.
I love that. I love that. It was actually your idea to use this book by Jim Collins as the foundation for our conversation today. We're going to be talking about good to great. So why do you think good to great is still so valuable? I mean, it's been more than 20 years since it was originally published.
Because of the in-depth research that Tim Collins and his team, and I want to emphasize that word team of researchers, the work that they did across a spectrum of different companies and industry. And I share with you, Tim Collins continued to develop information from that research. He now has a book, The Flywheel, that we'll talk about a little bit. So, although Good to Great was published almost 20 years ago, The Flywheel was published in 2019. So, this work continues. And I think this work is somewhat like the Bible, it is ageless.
Yeah, I agree. And I am actually, this may be surprising, but I don't often make recommendations on business or leadership texts. I often find them to be much too opinion based. But the reason why I love Collins's work is he is a researcher at heart. And impeccable. The research team just did really incredible work, but his writing is engaging, it's meaningful, and it is sort of timeless. It's easy to read even 22 years later. Oh, I can't do math. What, 23 years later? So the three books at the bottom of your screen are sort of they are intended to work together. I prefer good to great out of the three of them. I mean, if you have time to read all three of them, fantastic. But if you just have one great read that you want to add to your list, I do recommend good to great. That leads us to our goals for today. We want to have a really great conversation, number one, but we are also going to, as you know, use good to great as our foundation. And we want to hit some of the key highlights from that text. We're not going to be able to hit everything, But we want to start with level five leadership, which is really important to that book. We're also going to cover the hedgehog concept, the culture of discipline, the role of technology, which I think is really interesting in this time that we're going through, and then also the Stockdale paradox and the flywheel effect. So Nate, let's go ahead and start with one of the key questions that Jim Collins tries to ask in the book and answer. What is the enemy of greatness?
As being the enemy of greatness, I'd add a lack of vision and faith. And I think when you read A Good to Great and the company books, you'll find vision, faith, and discipline are woven into these concepts.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of good companies, we have a lot of good universities, we have a lot of good worship centers. But getting to great requires discipline, and we'll talk about these concepts, and vision, and that requires leadership. I will say that Hardin has a global mission, and I do think that Tim Collins' book is focused on, at that era, American companies. But now we're in a global economy. So I think we have to broaden some of our thoughts and concepts in that regard. And I know
Mhm.
you have some entrepreneurs in the classroom that will probably grow into global companies. So I want to
Yes.
share that.
Yes. Okay, so let's go ahead and address the fact that we do have a classroom of that's a hard word, entrepreneurial students joining us today. So, Nate, what do you think might be the most valuable idea for these emerging leaders to take from that text?
Well, there are 5 levels of leadership. I think the entrepreneurs kind of may have an NL level of level 5, but I think they need to hone their skills if they're going to have a great company along the entire spectrum of those 5 levels. And so I think that's important to them to understand all 5 levels. If they haven't worked their way through those 5 levels, surely they will have staff members and colleagues that they'll need to grow through those areas. So for that the entrepreneurs, I would say understanding all 5 levels and how they can engage those levels and find that level 5 leader in their organization or become
Okay.
that 5 level leader themselves.
I think that that is a great segue into the level five leadership, the level five leader. So the image that's on your screen right now is taken from the text, and it shows all four levels of leadership. And I do think it's important, Nate. I want to know if you agree, but he spends some intentional time in the text separating charisma from leadership. He really pulls those ideas apart. And I think that's because we often assume that if someone is very charismatic or very charming or very likable, that they are probably also just a good leader. Like that's the assumption. Um, but his research team found something very opposite of that. They found that level five leaders were actually not charismatic. I watched a video of him, a lecture of Jim Collins, and he said that the level five leaders in their study had a charisma bypass procedure. Um, Basically, that they were not out charming people with their magnetism and appeal. In fact, they were often eccentric, socially withdrawn people. But what they did have was this driven aim for their company or for a greater cause, something bigger than themselves, like a burning ambition. What do you think about that, Nate?
I think that greater cause was a key characteristics of most of those leaders. And I would say the humbleness also is a confident piece that they knew where they wanted to take their company. They had metrics that would get them there, and the flywheel concept, we'll talk again. And then they honed in on the economic model of the hedgehog that we'll talk about that made their company work and what they could do best.
Yeah.
But I'm not necessarily think that I think humbleness is a charismatic concept because I think people kind of drive the people who they think are authentic. And
Yes.
I think the humbleness that these leaders shown and certainly shown in others is charismatic in that you can believe in what they say and you can believe in what that they will do.
Yes. That's very good. And thank you for making the point that that was the other characteristic of level five leaders. Um, they were personally humble, but for their cause or for their business, they were hugely ambitious. So their ambition was not personal, it wasn't personally motivated, it was for this thing that was bigger than themselves, which I think is quite admirable. Um, so we probably have some people on our call today who may be at the beginning of their careers, and they are very likely starting out at this level one leadership. And their job as they start out is really to be intentional about making productive contributions, to do their best, to learn their responsibilities. And as they grow, then they become very rich contributors to team effectiveness. So they're moving up as they grow. I think most of us probably feel very lucky if we are in an organization with a level four leader who leads consistently at a level four. The difference I think we really need to talk about here, though, is that level four leaders can get people to follow them, but level five leaders can get people to follow the cause. And that's sort of like the distinguishing characteristic. What would you add to that, Nate?
I think that level five and level four leaders are very capable. I think some of the difference in the level five is inspiring others to do the mission within their own sphere of influence. I think we often, if you're talking about, well, the military, our cause in reference to this great country, and inspiring that level one leader, that level two, that level three, that level four leader to be all that they can be as they combine towards a common cause and a common set of values. So I say that some of the difference in level four leaders have to inspire also to have
Yes.
that team. If they're inspired to the mission, I think the level five leader inspired to the good of the company and the customers and other stakeholders.
Yes, I agree. And you've mentioned a couple of times already this hedgehog concept. So let's go ahead and jump into that because I do think it's a big part of level five leadership. They're partners in all of this. So a great theme, I think it's my favorite theme actually from the book is this hedgehog concept. And Collins provides a fable about a fox and a hedgehog. It originated with an ancient Greek proverb that says, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows the one thing. So the fox, he's quick-witted, he's quick on his feet. He tries dozens of different ways to kill the hedgehog. So he's sneaking up, he's hiding himself, he's pouncing, he's playing dead. He tries everything, and every day he comes at it with a new approach. And every day the fox is defeated by this little hedgehog who knows one thing, and that one thing is to roll up into a ball and protect himself. And so the lesson to be learned from the hedgehog concept is you can be good at a lot of different things, but you need to be great at one thing. And you need to identify what that one thing is. Did I recount that accurately?
I think that could be within the company, and we talked about the economic drivers. One of the other observations I make about the hedgehog is that the hedgehog is a good observer too. The hedgehog may not know about things, but they have observed many things as they observe the fox. But they do know that their main responsibility is to protect themselves
Yeah.
and to protect their company and protect their stakeholders. So that hedgehog is a good observer. I think as a leader in their surroundings, they're able to understand that, however, I got to survive and I have to be good at this to survive.
Yes. To thrive, you have to survive. So
Yes.
we probably need to talk a little bit about these interlocking circles because this is another part of the hedgehog explanation. So Collins says that the hedgehog lives in the intersection of these three priorities. And the priorities are, what are you passionate about? He says, what are you genetically encoded for? I think that's, what are you made to do? He separates that by saying he went off to college and he thought he would be a mathematician because he was good at math. He was one of those kids who'd always been good at math. And then he realized that he was in classes with people who were genetically encoded to do math and that there were some things he could not be great at. And that was one of them. So the thing that you're genetically encoded for may or may not be the thing that you are passionate about. And then the other piece of it is what do you do that has economic value? What's your economic driver? What is paying the way for you to do what you're passionate about and what you're put on earth to do? And when those three things meet in the middle, that's your big idea. That's your mission. That's your hedgehog. So when we lead from our hedgehog, we are leading from this very deep well of confidence, of faith, of endurance, and protecting the thing that we really love. What would you add to that, Nate?
Well, Dr. Bishop, you and I also talked about Rick Warren and his concept of purpose-driven life.
Mm,
And I think those two circles, what are you passionate about and what are you genetically encoded for, they surround this, your purpose, or your company's purpose,
mm,
or your church purpose, or whatever entity. And then in your personal life, what are you passionate about? What are your genetic encoded for? What's your purpose? However, you got to fund that purpose in some way, and you got to find the economics of it. Or in the social setting, say the church, what resources are available to drive the ministry? Or in a company, you got to have capital,
mm.
and what's driving the capital? So
Yeah.
I like the inner circle, and as you pointed out, is where they interlocked is where, and we're going to talk about it. The flywheel gets this acceleration.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think this might be a good time for us to try to work in that culture of discipline and the role of technology and how all of that fits with level five leadership and this hedgehog concept. So let's start with let's start with the role of technology. Um, so Colin says that technology is not a driver, it's an accelerator. What do you think that means?
Enabler. I had a leader shared with me. He was a physician. He talked about that new drugs. He don't want to be the first to prescribe new drugs, but he wants to understand them, and then as he sees their efficacy, apply them. And I think that has to do with technology. Uh, Technology is often marketed as it will solve all the management issues. Uh, However, I think you got to watch it, and then does it apply to your company?
Yeah.
does it apply to making your company well? And I think that that's what Collins is pointing to. You just can't jump on technology. How does it fit in your flywheel?
Mm, yeah. So another piece of this puzzle is the culture of discipline. He spends an entire chapter talking about a culture of discipline, and he's talking about discipline of people, discipline of thought, and discipline of action. So that could be, your mission statements, your vision statements, your purpose statements. What, how did those apply to the culture of discipline?
Your values, your mission statement keeps you focused. And the things that you do on a daily basis, the small things to stay true to your value statement and to your mission, it takes discipline to do that. You get a lot of distractor, a lot of noise, and in this life, you get some storms in your life. But you got to stay focused on what is the mission, what is the purpose, and what do I do today to make tomorrow better. But I also have to enjoy today. So that
Yes.
takes that takes discipline. It takes discipline to take a time to take a walk. And many
Yes.
leaders take that time, the great leaders, and we see it in some of the concepts and the leaders that Collins identified. They often took time for themselves. So I think that discipline, you can get harried into I've got to do the next task, I got to do the next task. But I think these level five leaders also take time to reflect and to think.
Mm, yes. I have, I think, a really great quote from Colin that I want to share on the screen. A culture of discipline is not a principle of business, it's a principle of greatness. So it's something that applies well beyond, your business ventures. I also think it's important that we note that Collins does not equate discipline with tyranny. Um, and instead, he ties discipline to that hedgehog concept, to those mission and value statements, like you just said. Um, the most disciplined people in the world continually and faithfully return to their mission, to their values, to their hedgehog when decisions need to be made, whether they're really big decisions or really small decisions, right? Um, like the best athletes in the world are paying very close attention to every part of their training schedule. It's like they don't okay, he gives an example of a world-class athlete who won the Ironman triathlon, I don't know, 6 or 7 times. And he tells a story about that guy that his training schedule, he burned like more than 5,000 calories every day, but he would still rinse off his cottage cheese every day to make sure that he wasn't eating any additional fat from the cottage cheese. He would rinse it off before eating it. And that example was to say that even if something seems small or insignificant, a truly great person, a truly great individual will still exhibit this level of discipline and attention to detail, whether it's something really big or something that seems not so important. I really liked that story. I thought that that was pretty good. What do you think?
I think that discipline, but there's a book in the Bible that provides us, I think, very good tenets of discipline, and that's Proverbs. And I don't want to I don't want to get too far away from the hedgehog concept, but Proverbs talks about discipline in life and family, and I think that's applicable in business also,
Mm,
and in nonprofits. So that discipline of life. And of course, those 31 proverbs, I think you can find examples of discipline in your own self motivation, community, and in commerce. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you don't over you don't take a too much of a profit. When I'm saying you don't you don't create profit that are not healthy. You got to be a good discipline to know what is the profit margins, and I think that even that discipline is important.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Let's talk a little bit more deeply about the role of technology. And the image on the screen, I'm hoping helps us look at that hedgehog again through the vision of how technology works in our companies. So Collins believes technology is an accelerator, not a creator, and he cautions leaders against blindly following technology trends without being really careful and intentional about the role that technology is going to play. And so he suggests that this sort of tier of questions you start with, does this tech actually fit with our hedgehog concept? If the answer is yes, then become the best. Like do whatever is necessary, put all of your best people on it, put your resources on it and become the best. If the answer is no, then the next question is, well, do we need the technology? If the answer is yes to that, then he says do enough to be equal with your competitors. Do enough to achieve industry parity. You want to be where everybody else is, but you don't have to put everything into that box. And if the answer is no, we don't need that technology, then you ignore it. It no longer is part of the conversation. I don't know that all organizations follow this chart. So let's think about the use of AI across the board. Like I feel like a lot of people are adopting it because everybody's adopting it, and I don't know that it's going to fit the hedgehog for all companies. What are your thoughts on that?
Our AI's example currently, I one other area where you see technology is critical is in hospitals. And I'll talk about a CAT scan and an MRI. Well, if you have a sprained ankle, you don't need an MRI for that. You may need a X-ray. But if you send that patient to get the MRI, the use of technology, the expense of that to the patient and to the insurer, it increases non-value. However, some may say, well, that's the highest technology. But you also have to, in technology, understand the cost and what it's designed for. And I
Mm,
think your point about AI is, I think you're still going to need a human to make human decisions. So AI will not eliminate all functions and tasks. And a leader has to understand how to apply AI at its most effective level. So I think your point about AI is a good example for today's leaders in this knowledge economy that we are vastly growing into.
yeah, I mean, I think it's something, of course, in higher education, it's something that we are talking a lot about because it's sort of changing the face of what we do in many ways. Um, but I really like these questions. I think they're useful for me. Does, if I were to ask myself, does AI fit directly with my hedgehog concept of preparing leaders to be more effective in their workplaces? I don't know that my answer would be yes, that AI is the hedgehog concept that I'm worried about. I do think that we need to be good at it. We need to have a good, strong foundation in it, but I don't necessarily think that we need to be pioneers in it. Um, anyway, that's one thing I've been struggling
Oh,
with.
that you make a good point. And I think that's what my mentor was saying in reference to some of the prescription drugs. You don't have to be a pioneer in it. And we saw that in this opioid epidemic, where
Mm,
many physicians started prescribing that. This is just an example.
Yes.
And I think AI can be a disruptor too when we start applying it to every situation.
Yeah, that's good. That's valuable. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the Stockdale paradox, which is another concept in this book. Um, so a little
Dr.
bit of,
Bishop, were there any questions around the hedgehog that we may could take at this time, maybe one or two, the role of technology? I'd like to see what
yeah,
the rest of us on this podcast may have towards that. I hadn't seen any questions, but
right.
there may be one or two.
So, guests, if you have any questions about what we've talked about so far, we would love for you to put those into the chat. I will monitor that and keep an eye on it. And while we're waiting, we'll go ahead and go forward, but we can always stop and come back and address those. So the Stockdale paradox works alongside all of these other ideas in the book, but especially it works with confront the brutal facts. So this idea was named after Admiral Jim Stockdale, who, Nate, do you know this story? Do you want to tell this story?
Uh, yes, Admiral Stockdale was a prisoner of war and one of the longest prisons of war in our country. And he survived was really accepting the facts that I'm a prisoner, but also staying focused on what could he do to survive this ordeal. And but you got to realize that these are the facts of my circumstances.
Mm,
So that's kind of what I gleaned from that.
yes. We do have a question, Nate. So let's go ahead and take that, and then we'll come back to Stockdale. What types of technological advances have impacted your career the most over the past 10 to 20 years? And what leadership lessons have you learned from adopting new tech?
Share with you in 2003, I went to Korea for 3 years. And when I returned to the United States in 2006, the use of the cell phone was just accelerated communications and the need to respond. Now, the economy of Korea is very technological focused, but our use of the cell phone in America was just amazing. And so I had to quickly adapt so that I could be successful in my responsibilities.
Yes.
However, it was broadly used, so I wasn't a pioneer, but I quickly adapted to. Some of the students won't appreciate a BlackBerry, but that
Yes.
that was that was a tool that really helped. And of course now I share with you that iPhone is probably one of the most important tools that a leader can have used correctly.
Mm, yes. I was trying to think what the technological advances would be in my, I don't know, almost 20 years in higher education. When I started, everything was graded by hand. I mean, we didn't, a lot of students actually just hand wrote their assignments. So, and that was 18 years ago. Like it's not like it was 50 years ago. Everyone did not come to college with their own computer. I mean, that just was not a thing. And now I don't think we have very any students who show up without some form of computer. I think that's the biggest advancement, but since most of what I did involved writing, I just adapted. I don't know, Nathan, that's such a good question. Like, I don't know what I learned other than I had to figure out how to use whatever everyone else was using and use it at a level that I would be respected at. Like I needed to not look like the idiot in the room, but I also didn't need to like develop my own technology. So I'm not sure we answered that very well, but thank you for the question. David Key
Dr.
says,
Bishop, I would say this, um, in healthcare, the electronic medical record,
yeah,
it has been the technology. However, when there are some type of breach or that system is down,
mm,
you have to return to a hard copy record. So I say that technology is a tool. However, we need alternate methods to perform the mission. So in your company and in your personal life, uh, pay attention to the periodic table and to the fractions because you may have to use them someday. That
yes.
that instrument may not be available.
We have another question from one of our students who's on the call. Thank you for this question. If level five leaders embody this paradoxical blend of personal humility and professional will, how can organizations identify and cultivate these traits without encouraging ego-driven ambition within what are often very competitive environments?
I would say the culture and the values of the organization. And that's why these values are so important in the mission statement. And those values have to not only be business driven, they got to be integrity and goodness driven. So
Mm,
I think that that's one of the pieces that leaders have got to pay attention to. The values don't not necessarily have to be quarterly profits. The
hmm
values have got to be customer focused and staff focused. And I think by encouraging those values, and that's an area I also say that our military has done a great job in selfless service, uh, completing the mission, having that integrity,
hmm
putting mission above self, being responsible for your obligations. And I think the company has to find a way to set those things that resonate with not only them, but their customers and their stakeholders.
Yes.
Dr. Bishop, your thoughts on that?
I think that in today's marketplace, one of the best things that we can do is develop a coaching culture in these organizations where people at all levels are getting some one-on-one personal attention to help them cultivate their strengths and to be able to identify their own strengths. I also think this is a very practical answer, but I think skip level meetings where maybe the direct manager is out of conversation and an employee gets to have an hour with someone higher up in the company where that person talks about the values that they're looking for and gives them some one-on-one attention. I think that that is a really great way of embodying those values that Colonel Todd is talking about, like the things that are more important than the sales or the numbers that are at the end of the day. I believe it's personal attention. That's my answer.
Dr. Bishop, I'd like to hear if Dr. Key had a thought on that. I know his class, and he probably has a lot more expertise in that than I have. I have some experiences. I wonder what he comment on that.
Well, let's give Dr. Key a chance to type in the chat, and while we do that, while he does that, we will finish up the Stockdale paradox.
Excellent.
Um, yes. So I think I was really touched by this idea in the book because Stockdale, he spent eight years, right? 8 years as a prisoner during Vietnam War. He was the highest ranking U.S. military officer. He was tortured a lot over that time period, and yet he maintained this faith that he would get out and that this would become part of a story of a life well lived and that he would be able to share it with others. Um, but the point that I want to share is this quote on the right hand side. He said, Admiral Jim Stockdale said, "This is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which we cannot afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. I think that that's important. I think it's important for Christ followers. I think it's important for business leaders. I think it's important for all of us. We have to be willing to to pick up the ugly rock and look and see what's growing underneath it, the obstacles that are in our way. We can't move past them if we don't understand them. So I think that this is a very important idea that we cannot ignore the hard things and just pretend they're not there because we can't grow if that is happening. So we do have an answer from Dr. Key. Thank you so much. His answer is pressure. Being faith driven keeps one grounded and humble. When we know our priorities are beyond us, we tend to put ourselves as stewards and not the hero and center of attention. I really like that. So his answer is faith. It's really great. Thank you. Thanks, David. Let's go ahead and keep powering on. I have um, this guy, the flywheel effect. We've been kind of talking about it here and there since we started. Nate, why don't you talk us through this and then I'll add some thoughts.
Well, this is a concept of using physics and applied management and leadership. Of course, with the flywheel, we know that it starts slow and deliberate, and then it picks up velocity, and then it starts driving energy, and then it propels to where you want it to go. And in this case, what Colin talked about is these small wins, that day-to-day requirement. If you were on a football team, you would probably call it tackling and blocking, getting that blocking technique correct, which then opens the field for the fullback to get 4 yards, 5 yards. And then with that success of 4 or 5 yards, you open up the offense and maybe get a pass out and I know all of us are not athletes and some of us are volleyball players and soccer players, but I share with you this concept of getting win after win, and then that accelerates customer after customer, and then that accelerate revenue after revenue. And in your life, uh, getting good grades in high school, that then you get confidence, you get good grades in college, and then you're able to come into this level one, and then you move through that confidence piece with small wins, getting to level two, three, four, five. So that's what I gleaned, and one example I would give in reference to the flywheel effect. Your thoughts?
Okay, yes, I'm gonna admit something that's a little bit embarrassing. When I first heard about this flywheel effect, I immediately had in my mind a picture in my mind of a fly fishing rod. My dad was a fisherman, and so that is what popped into my head was a fly fishing rod, not a flywheel. So, for those in the audience who might not be familiar with a flywheel, I did the research. I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a massive metal disc that was often found on these giant steam engines. So, it could have been 30 feet in diameter, maybe 2 or 3 feet thick, and they usually weighed about 5,000 pounds. So getting one of those things to even move would not have been easy. And so Collins uses this to help us realize that a task of getting the flywheel to rotate on the axle, it can't be done alone, number one. I mean, you need a lot of help to get it to move. So it's going to take an entire team of people all pushing with everything they've got to get it to move just a little bit. And we have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing before it's actually going to make one rotation. And then we keep going again and we might get that second rotation. But we are expending a lot of effort in those early days to get this thing to turn. But the good news is once we've built up some momentum, we don't have to touch that flywheel as often. And so the momentum carries itself, and we're able to sort of step back a little bit and just maintain that momentum, which is encouraging. Personally, it's encouraging because I'm in year 4 of a new program, and the first 2 to 3 years were really hard because we were getting that flywheel moving. But I am starting to see now that we had some really healthy momentum and it is carrying us now. So eventually, the momentum of the flywheel, hopefully, ideally, according to Collins, will not need as much effort at some point. And that is sort of the beauty of setting this up is if you start with the disciplined people and then you work on disciplined thought, you're really focusing on the hedgehog concept, and then you really develop this culture of discipline and discipline action, then that's where your breakthrough happens and that's where you see so much growth. What do you think about that?
If I could add, again,
Yes.
this research that Dr. Collins has been doing, the 2019 book, The Flywheel, and for the entrepreneurs, it's finding in your company, what is your flywheel? Is it a process? Is it manufacturing? And then what are the components of your flywheel? The throughputs? Is it people? Is it material? And then what's the sequence of that flywheel through that input?
Mm,
So there are some tenets of business and processes that you apply in today's business environment that will help you. First, what is your flywheel when you're trying to make a profit? What is your product? What are your services? And then what's the components of that flywheel, and how do you get each of those components to operate efficiently and effectively? And then what's the sequence? Or what's the
hmm
workflow? What's the operational aspects? So I share with the entrepreneurial class also, paging through Collins' book on the flywheel may be helpful in as they they start their companies and then expand and scale their companies.
hmm He also says at one point um, that we need to be concerned with who decisions before we're concerned with what decisions. So, in other words, none of this really happens unless you have the right people in the right positions doing the things that they're really good at. And so he spends a lot of time talking about hiring the right people, which I think is important. Especially if you're starting a business from scratch, you want to start with the right people. There's actually a quote at some point in the book where he says, if you have a doubt about someone, if you have any doubt about hiring someone, then you don't hire them. You don't hire them just because they're available. You hire the right person, which I think is something that we don't always spend enough time thinking about.
And
Thoughts?
I'd add that there's probably been a crisis in secondary education when we had a shortage of teachers. So we may not have hired the right educator, first grade, fifth grade, math. And so I think that the schools of education, I was in a dialogue with some educators, and they said all professions come through education.
Hmm.
That engineer had to have a math teacher. That physician had to have a biology teacher. That soldier had to have a coach,
Mm,
had to have a reading teacher. So I think that this is an area that we've really got to focus in education, getting the right individuals in the classroom. And I think Hardin University and their educational leadership, that's important.
yes.
And I applaud Hardin for doing that.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. I think that that is very true and also very kind of you to say. So let's kind of talk for a minute about that then. That would be teachers obviously are in a helping profession. social workers, healthcare, which you've mentioned quite a bit, first responders. Which of Collins's ideas do you think people in a helping profession might kind of pursue or learn a little bit more about for themselves?
Actually, the discipline. I think when you're in a service industry, you kind of see some days that you say, wow, this just was you're an educator, you see a child that drops out, or if you're in healthcare, you see a patient that you weren't able to save, or if you're a minister in a church, you see someone backslide. But I think the discipline of going through the day-to-day wins and staying focused on mission is something service industry I think it can glean from some of the concepts of
Mhm.
Tim Collins.
Yes. Yeah, that's really good. Well, we are going to start wrapping up our time. We definitely are not going to hold you later than the full hour. So I'm going to I would feel remiss if I did not plug our next webinar. But as I'm doing that, audience, please give us a takeaway from our time together. We'd like to know something that you learned or something that you want to learn more about. We would love to see that in the chat. And while you're doing that, I need to show you this. Our final webinar of 2024 will be on November 20th. That's going to be the Wednesday before the week for Thanksgiving. You can scan that QR code to register for it. I'm going to be joined by my colleague and friend, Amy Cox, and we're going to use another classic leadership text called What Works for Women at Work for that conversation. But I do want to, it's really important that you hear this. This is not just for women. This topic and the conversation will be relevant for men and women. We really hope to see plenty of men on the call with us next month. So please scan that or look for a sign up for us on LinkedIn for the next webinar. Okay, we have a message. We have a takeaway from Kevin Kale, who said, discipline, discipline, discipline is his takeaway. Love that. Kathy Dillon says the flywheel concept is something that she's taking away. We would love to hear from more of you. Nate, while they're doing that, what's your takeaway from our time together today?
Dr. Bishop, I want to talk about your webinar on the
Okay.
24th. We have in the state of Arkansas a woman governor.
Yes.
We have a woman lieutenant governor. I share with you some of the greatest leaders that I've had in our military have been women. Three-star general, two-star general Holly Bolin, when I shared that she had a disciplined, nurturing leadership style that very encouraging. However, wanted you to meet the mission, and I think that a person, regardless of gender, understanding the different leadership styles from our life experiences, this is important to our communities. And I share with you the best comptroller I knew was my grandmother. She bought groceries for our home, and just provided a great resources to ensure that all of us would succeed. But I do
Yes.
say that this webinar is important. So what I've gleaned from our talk is an opportunity to attend this webinar. So I'm glad
Well,
for that.
great. Yes. Well, I have learned so much from you over the last month while we've had our chats about this call today. And I'm just really grateful to have you in our corner here at Harding. You are such a good supporter of what we're doing. And I love that you are continuing your own personal mission of sort of taking care of veterans in Arkansas and really pouring into multiple universities and taking care of education. So thank you for what you do. We do have a couple more comments and then we'll close out our time. Um, Humility and leadership is the key from Chantel Taylor. Thank you for that. Michael Swain says, I liked hearing about the different concepts and how they interact as part of that flywheel. Me too, Michael. That's like one of my favorite parts of this book. Seeing how everything connected and seeing how Collins had designed everything was really cool. Sylvia said she likes the contributions from Nate. And for me, I'm taking away the hedgehog theory. I love it. Yes. Never heard of that before. And it does absolutely does apply across a lot of different disciplines. John Boone says, great discussion and takeaways from a classic book. And he agrees that the flywheel concept was his favorite. And then Amy, who is going to be on the call with me next month, says she's going to read or listen to the book. So many great ideas. Thank you all so much for being part of this learning community, for making time for a fun conversation about something that's interesting. We appreciate you. We appreciate your time. And we hope you have a great day. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
I mean,
Dr. Bishop. Thank you, Harding
thank
University.
you. Thank you, Colonel Todd. I love the time. Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye.